Hey guys, it's Aisha here. There is some more demand for a bit more in-depth build guide rather than the imager format I've been using below down inside the comments that you can find. Yeah, let's get into it. This will be for my mono reversal erasing strike build. I took this build to 1000 a couple patches ago. The damage still holds up. It's a pure fizz scaling Sentinel build, focusing around dodge and glancing, and yeah, let's get into it. So. Let's take a look at the passives first. We'll just go through every passive, then the reasoning behind it, and we can move into skills after. So they recently changed Fearless. It used to be 10 flat health. That was absolutely amazing with the Vitality, but it's nerfed now. We took Juggernaut for our first row. While the armor isn't too important, we don't block, and the regen is lacking. If you're looking to go for a bit more focused on hardcore, you can probably take the Vitality just to get some more of that Void and Necrotic defense, but it's preference really. And then from there we move on to Stun Avoidance and Damage. Usually I like to see about 5% damage in general for Sentinel trees. Like this is sort of the baseline, right? Because Strength is 4% on your Racing Strike. So anywhere in the neighborhood of like 5% and up for passives, I believe, looks pretty good. And we're not taking a look at Retribution, and Ironclad isn't too important for armor. And the rest can go into stun chance and 5% damage and overwhelm. The other masteries are a bit more conditional, and while retaliation is decent, we don't block on our two-hand build. And then after that, while you're leveling, you probably do want to stop by Paladin first just to get some more flat health. And then we can get ourselves a little bit of fizz and fire damage. While we don't deal fire damage, it's decent for leveling if you're using those scorching rings, and 4% physical damage is about enough just to get you those 10 points for Holy Aura. Forge Guard isn't too important for this build, so we skip it. Then we move over to Void Knight. And the majority of points, while Forge Knight does have Forge Guard, does have some decent skills, we want to dump all our points into Void Knight because of Void Corruption, which gives you 1% multiplier per point in Void Knight. So we have an option between recently damage increase on kill recently versus flat health. We'll take the flat health here, and it's especially good for leveling because at this point you're probably doing monoliths around level 30-ish, and you're going to be seeing a lot of Void Mauls, a lot of World Sunders, probably some Void Forms. And I do not like the conditional damage. We move on to World Eater here for 3% Leech, and then Sorrow and Steel for the majority of our physical damage. At 7% a point, it's really nice. Void Corruption is probably the best single node you'll ever find on any passive tree for probably a whopping 80% crit multiplier on Void Knight. And then we'll take Umbral Attunement for a bit more damage and a little bit of attunement, which does feed into our resistances here, but not too much. It's just a general nice way to dump points. And then we'll take Void Blades, which gives us additional void damage on hit. While we are very heavily spec'd into fizz damage, we do have a decent percent of melee damage as well. And melee damage does scale our whatever flat damage we add into a Racing Strike. And a Racing Strike itself has 170% effectiveness on initial hit. We skip this row here. While Finality is pretty decent, Racing Strike itself has a 10% cult, which we'll get into. And then we take melee physical damage. We're sacrificing some armor, and armor I feel isn't too important in this game right now. I'd say probably the scariest thing to hit you with physical damage is probably Scullens and melee range, or huge packs of those Bone Archers. There's some on-kill effects here, and some leech that doesn't seem too important. No velocity doesn't seem to be working right now. It does not reflect inside our character sheet when we dip below 0 mana, so maybe it's worth consideration after we See it's actually working, and maybe some patches come by and fixes it. Rot Grip is pretty nice for time rot on hit because that is a lot of mitigation, but the issue is that Erasing Strike does not hit too much. We have some more void damage, but we're mostly scaling Fizz and melee damage. And then we take 8 points into heavy endurance training. And while I do really like Eternal Form, I felt like my gear was decent enough that I can skip it, but it's definitely recommended. And then the majority of our points gets dumped into Woe, and a personal preference would be Dread, which would be for the remaining 12 points. Mostly because I do want to scale up my movement speed, and this is more for a general purpose build. Now, if you were not to take those final dumps into movement speed, what I can recommend is finishing off your Woe, which is the majority of your melee percent damage, and then instead of taking Dread, you can take Eternal Form, giving you a nice chunk of defenses to Necrotic and Void, and a little bit more flat health, which is usually very welcome. And then the majority of the points we can take a look at here, and we can probably go into Void Aegis just for some emergency defenses. And otherwise, that really does seem about all of our options. We can also finish off Abyssal Endurance, just to bump ourselves over 2,000 health. And that's a nice place to stop for our build. Okay, let's move into the passives for our skills. Our main skill is going to be Erasing Strike. It is currently spec'd into more movement defenses, but instead of taking these 4 points here, we can reallocate them elsewhere. So I take 5 points into Merciful because usually when you're approaching enemies with Lunge, or the majority of enemies will die in one hit with Erasing Strike. You'll see a ton of output of damage per hit, and that's probably the bulk of the damage from Erasing Strike itself. And then we move into Erasure of the Living, which gives 10% Cull at max. That's the reason why we didn't take the Cull earlier on the tree for 15%, because there's 8% on here. And even if we did take the Cull on the tree to save us passive points, it does increase damage by 5% per point as well, so it's still a very efficient node regardless. We take a travel node into increased damage, and then we take only 1 point of Attune Strike to get that mana efficiency. The mana efficiency you'll see have much higher returns in the initial points, so 1 or 2 points to Attune Strike recommended. Prophet's Onslaught adds base crit onto Erasing Strike. At 3% a point, it's probably one of the biggest crit nodes I've ever seen in the game, and at 78 base crit at 78 crit on our sheet DPS, that's already after the increased crit from our gear, such as from our rings and potentially our necklace, as well as our relic. So it isn't plus 9% crit to this, but rather it's going to be 9% crit added to the base of our crit before those multipliers. So at added 9%, you're probably going to see your crit cap out around maybe 75%. The reason why I only have 6 here is because I took some more points into utilities such as movement speed here. And I do have enough increased crit on my gear that I get about maybe 95% crit already. Essence of the End is Void Essences on crit. Now it's interesting because all these other Void Essence generations on Sentinel seem to be on kill or some other interesting condition like ripostes. So having 33% on crit, these stack up very quickly, and you're going to be able to maintain them even on a single enemy. It increases in void and melee damage and reduces in stun duration, so we're mostly taking only 1 point inside this just to sustain our void essence. We take 2 points into our 80% crit multi, which is another huge 2 points, and the rest here, again, you can reallocate them to either maxing out Erasure of the Living, maybe another point in Obliteration, maybe another point inside of Attune Strike. And of course, you can always cap your onslaught. So I'd say those 4 points can go into 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, the reason why I had movement speed here was because I wanted to make my build a little bit quicker. When you're able to kill enemies, yeah, you're able to not rely on lunge too much, and it feels a little bit more comfier when you can save lunge for getting in and out of combat. So let's move over to Volatile Reversal. Now, the idea behind Volatile Reversal is that I expect it to not recover health, which gives a 200% increased cooldown recovery. My cooldown on Volatile Reversal is about 6 seconds, and I also took points into Traveler's Fatigue, which gives another 50% increased cooldown recovery speed. There's some other points here like movement speed, attack speed, and a debuff which increases the damage enemies take by 30%, as well as Time Rot on here for Food for Worms. I ignored the other passives because they're mostly dot related. And the 10% damage taken on yourself for Traveler's Frailty is a little bit too much for me, especially when I'm pushing higher waves. So the main use behind Volatile Reversal is to reverse your mana after you attack and dump out your mana. It is a little buggy, but in time they'll fix it, and there is a rhythm that you can use if you space out your attacks to always recover your mana. So the idea behind Volatile Reversal is just to hold, use your Erasing Strike, dump your mana, and then recover your mana with Volatile Reversal. The important part about it is that you actually get 9% of your cooldown back on kill. So if you kill 10 enemies with anything, your Volatile Reversal's cooldown will reset. So the idea is that you're chaining kills and you're going to dump your mana and then reverse it back whenever you can. Okay, moving on to Holy Aura. These are essentially standard nodes for Holy Aura. You're getting some vitality, some armor, dexterity, and most importantly, I'd say the most important node here is the dodge percent. While you're using Holy Aura, I think it's really hard not to go dodge on Sentinel, because the idea is that with Holy Aura, free 45% increased dodge, insane. Right, it looks like I'm getting about 400 dodge from it. Does that seem to be right? Yeah, about there, 300, 400 dodge. So you don't really need dodge percent on much more gear. I'd say maybe only 2 pieces. Dodge percent, again. So I have dodge percent on my belt and dodge percent from Holy Aura, which gives me about 80% increased dodge. So that's a big multiplier on my dodge, and the rest is flat dodge just to supplement the base dodge. And I get some more attack speed here, some more crit, some more base crit, and extreme zeal, which gives me some more multiplier. And again, don't forget to activate Holy Aura whenever you're in a pinch or whenever you want to do DPS, because you do increase your dodge as well, and it gets you about 60% dodge. And yeah, you did see that I had I'll go over the gear later, but you did see I had a dodge rating on the belt. So if I pop both of them at once, I'm about 70% dodge, and it's very hard to kill me. Just a reminder that True Strike does decrease your movement speed, and your movement speed will go down a tiny bit when you activate Holy Aura. It's about 45 here on movement speed. You activate it, it's about 40%. That's okay. We'll take our Lunge, and in general, I do like Lunge to be full utility. The idea is that you're going to have 2 stacks of Lunge, and increase recovery speed, increase mana efficiency, and you have 8 strength per Lunge, 100% void and elemental protections, and 70% stun avoidance and armor. So while I do not have much stun avoidance, it's not too necessary after the changes where you don't get chain stun anymore. But the idea is that Lunge acts as a movement utility, and especially when it's spec'd into Unstoppable for Invincible, you're able to use it to maneuver around the battlefield very quickly. Now I do have Vengeance spec'd here. It isn't too big of a deal. Usually I prefer to have something else inside my final slot, like for example Juggernaut Stance. You can have Ephemeral Stance, or maybe even Ravaging Stance if you're looking to battle against enemies that have heals when not taking damage. I'd say the last slot here is pretty flexible. I'd be very interested in Manifest Weapon after they give it a tree. And maybe even Warpath if you're looking for something to spice up your gameplay. I keep Vengeance here just so I can start poking enemies in case I do mess up the rotation and get stuck at negative mana. On to Itemization. The weapon itself, we have a lot of added flat melee damage because the idea behind it is that you get 170% effectiveness on the added flat damage. It'll always be on a polearm base because you're looking for as much crit chance as you can get. In general, you get 160% crit chance just from the Erasing Strike tree and one single point into that Void Corruption node on Void Knight. So any increases inside your critical chance is multiplied by a huge amount. I have about nearly 400% critical strike multiplier, and I really can't get more. If I switch out maybe crit multi onto my amulet instead of critical chance, but the idea is that you mostly want those two prefixes, melee crit chance and melee phys damage. Of course, the polearm base is the highest possible. It drops at level 74. The Sovnia, it is up to around 3 to 12% base crit. So this is 25% chance base crit. You add that to the 5% chance that you get from base, and 9% from Erasing Strike's tree, and 4%, or I'd say 5%, yeah, 4% from True Strike, and you're looking at around 44% base crit. So if you get around 110, 120 critical strike chance, you cap your crit. And that is absolutely huge for your damage. You're always dealing this 400% crit strike multiplier. Alright, then some basic defenses you're looking at. You're glancing on your gear. I prefer double glancing on my chest piece instead of strength, just because it's decent. Yeah, you can go strength for the percentage damage, but I don't feel it's too necessary. If I don't get the glancing on my chest, I'd probably have to move the glancing over to my rings, and it's kind of hard to give up crit chance on the rings. On our boots, it's also a decent spot to put dodge percent, but you really do want to focus on the movement speed on your boots. Everywhere else is basically double health, and I do have a heavy preference for jeweled circlets because of the plus mana implicit. The more mana you have, the comfier Erasing Strike will feel when you're trying to dump out all your mana. And maybe and you want to look for one extra cast, 2 extra casts, because that really does help your clear in case you have any stragglers left behind. The majority of our dodge comes from the amulet and our rings. These rings aren't perfect. I can add more health on them if necessary, but it's a little rough right now inside the poverty bins with our glyphs. So we get about 80 per piece dodge on maybe 4 or 5 pieces of gear, and you're pretty set. And the majority of our dodge, I'd say the bulk of it, also comes from the belts, which can have both all 3 dodge rating, dodge percentage, and dodge on potion. When I pop my dodge on potion, the multiplier gives it, I don't have any potions right now, but the multiplier puts it around I'd say 300 extra dodge. And the rest of our DPS slots come from our rings and our relic. And that does it for gear itemization. You really want to see around at least 40% dodge. It's not that hard on Sentinel. It's okay to give up some life for some dodge. You can even push up higher to 60%. But you probably don't want the dodge rating potion then. And make sure you do cap glancing. Alright, so let's get into some gameplay here. So again, the idea is to dump out your mana with a Racing Strike and then reversal it, and you just keep chaining those on kill. You keep chaining the cooldown reduction on kill on your Volatile reversal. You can keep your stacks up with Lunge too. So I'm going to mob all these enemies here, pop my Holy Aura, give it one shot, and then reverse my mana back to full. You can see we have a lot of void protection here too, just from the abyssal orbs. It's about, I can get up to like 40, even 50. I've seen 60% void res too. There's just one thing to remember, is that you deal the most damage possible when the enemy has taken a hit of damage. So if you see our first hit here, if we don't one-shot him, it's about 1,000, but our second follow-up shot deals 2,000. So you're getting close to double damage as long as you have any damaged the enemy already. And you can see the cooldown reset instantly once we kill about, I'd say, 7 to 8 enemies from Racing Strike. And we just use our Lunge to get around, because you do get 8% strength per Lunge, which does increase your damage quite a bit. 55 strength, 63 strength. And you can even use it a bit just to sort of damage the enemy before you start dealing actual DPS to them. As you can see, the movement speed is very comfy. And if you're managing your mana well enough, you don't need a Racing Strike. I mean, you don't need Vengeance here just for a backup. You can always switch it over to Ephemeral Stance. Get a nice bigger chunk of damage. We're seeing close to 30,000. We're seeing close to 30Ks there. We do pop Holy Aura whenever we feel the need to bump our dodge up a little bit. But it does take a decent chunk of mana, so it's just something to be mindful of. Alright. And when you're looking at the weapon, chance to chill is pretty decent. The suffixes aren't incredibly important. You really do want to... I'd rather use a tier 5 times 2 weapon with just the 2 prefixes. Sometimes you do see your health on the lower... Sometimes you do see your mana on the lower side. Again, you could always use Vengeance for that. Maybe you can even spec into Warpath just to use with full mana drain reduction, because it costs 0 mana when you spec into all the regen and everything. You could probably use that as well. So I'll do a couple more waves here, and then we can move over to Monolith just to show how the gameplay Monolith looks like. It's a little clunkier. And the one issue with the build is that sometimes you don't really want to dump all your mana onto a single target. It's always okay to mob these enemies with Lunge, because, you know, the enemy density does get a lot higher inside higher waves. You're gonna start seeing pretty big packs of enemies around wave 200, and there's no problem kiting around a bit, stacking up enemies, and then killing them all at once. Like for example here, I do have to wait for the cooldown on my Volatile reversal a bit, but just be mindful about where the enemies are. Be mindful about how many kills you can get before your reset comes down, and if you manage it well enough, you'll be around enough mana to finish the wave. While you're leveling with a lower level weapon, you probably do want to keep Vengeance on your bar just to have something to attack with. And endgame, you can just switch to whichever you like. Alright. I'd say this is one of my faster builds, if not for the fact that Volatile Reversal is a little buggy. I got to 200 waves in approximately 15 minutes. I'd say if Volatile Reversal wasn't buggy, you'd probably see a 40-minute run. And it's important to know that it's a melee damage build, right? You're going to be scaling a lot of damage off your weapon. You're going to be scaling a lot of damage off your jewelry as well. Your crit chance and your amulet chance. Amulet crit chance. So while the build does level with you, you won't see the results you're expecting unless you upgrade your gear along the way. It's not as obvious on spell builds, just because a lot of the scaling does come from its base damage. It's also not as obvious as dot builds, because the dot already has the damage over time already has a base damage, and you're mostly scaling that. But if you're playing without a weapon if you're playing without the necessary stats on your weapon and on your jewelry for melee physical builds or physical builds in general, you're going to really see it. Alright. So let's move over to Monolith. Let's get a couple runs in just to get a feel for the build. Okay, so the build is a bit more of an arena build, and Sentinel doesn't do the best in Monolith just because it doesn't get a teleport similar to, it doesn't go through walls, the movement skills, similar to Mage's teleport or transplant from the Acolyte. But Lunge still feels pretty good to use. And what you're doing here is you're probably just going to be jumping from pack to pack, getting kills where you can, and you're mostly using the increased move speed from your erasing strike as well as from reversal itself. Just to move from pack to pack. Lunge still feels really good. And dodge enemies still suck. But it does take some getting used to. You won't be able to manage your mana efficiently right away. With Volatile Reversal, sometimes it may bug you out and leave you at negative mana. Sometimes you may kill the enemies before you're able to reset and lunge to them. There is some thought in being able to use Volatile Reversal. But if you are, you're rewarded with a pretty well-rounded build. And you can really play any skill you want on this physical damage-based build. You could play in... And I'd say it's pretty decent for group content too, because you're probably going to be scaling off a lot of crit multi. The issue with that is that multiplayer isn't out yet, but we'll see. For leveling the build itself, I'd say it was a pretty decent build. I did do some of the sponsored event hardcore sell found races. Sentinel in general is just a very good class to race on. Erasing strike scales well. I believe one of the devs said on there you could see that the my mana basically got borked there, but it's okay. You wait for your mana to come down, you attack and you reset, and you hope for the best, really. But you can always be doing if you can always be doing something. If you're waiting for your mana to come back, you can always pull more mobs. You can always look to reset the mobs. You can always look for the reset. You don't have to just be sitting there doing nothing. You can keep Vengeance too. And leveling with Vengeance is really nifty because it's a good skill in general. But I will say that Lunge does feel faster on some of these areas that don't have a lot of walls. You'll never be able to beat a mage inside those forge areas where there's a lot of walls separating the walkways, but inside this place, like the gardens, even the desert area, the dunes, Lunge does beat out teleport sometimes. All right, we'll run through one more monolith just to get a bit more of a feel on it. You don't really need the attack speed on the build, but having a tiny bit of attack speed definitely never hurts. You could always put on your gloves, you could always put on your amulet. I have about 20% here, as long as it's not 0. As long as the attack speed isn't 0, you're looking good. That is also why I prefer to use a Jade Amulet base for my necklace. Again, one of the upsides of playing in Monolith is that you can always you can always damage the enemy a little bit with a lunge before you use a racing strike, which does let you get your full damage on those beefier mobs. And for my current Vengeance spec, I mostly have it spec into utility. I'll show you guys in 1 sec after this Monolith run. Add more health Void Maul. Okay, nice and easy. But yeah, the mana cost of Racing Strike is massive. The fact that you're able to sustain it at all, your DPS is definitely going to go through the roof once you're able to start picking up a lot of those resets and get in the rhythm of being able to manage your mana for a Racing Strike. So we'll take a quick look at Vengeance, and that should wrap it up. So for my Vengeance, I do have it spec'd into the more modifier for Executioner, without a doubt. Extra ripostes for the attack speed because I'm mostly using it just to poke at enemies very quickly, and Dark Duelist just to get the global damage. Changes I'd make if you're looking for a more defensive spec, you can take most of the points out of Rapid Strike. I don't think it's that big of a deal. You may find that lack of attack speed bothering you, but you could take these 7 points out and put 6 into Bolster just to get some more defenses, and 1 into Dark Duelist. Again, some of the options for this free spot here: Juggernaut stance, Ephemeral stance. Warpath maybe. Hammer throw with like in later waves you have a big pack, you can always spec it into this particular node. For mana returns on hit, I've used it before on another build, it's not bad. You can always look for Rebuke, and there's some mana regeneration here, and you can sustain the buffs after channeling. So yeah, I'd say that's the bulk of the build. As long as you have your Racing Strike, your Volatile Reversal, you're fine. Movement skill, and an aura. So the last spot's a free-for-all. Okay. And that should do it. So thanks again for watching the video. Leave a comment on maybe what you want to see next for the build guides. I'll probably be doing all my builds in like varying orders. We'll have to see about that. And feel free to tune in on Twitch whenever I stream. You can ask me questions about anything, and we can have a chat, go over some last Epoch stuff. And y'all have a nice day.